If you're working as a health, fitness, or wellness professional, you could have clients come to you who are dealing with bile acid malabsorption or bile acid diarrhea or BAM or BAD, like all the cool kids call it. So in this video, I want to help you understand some of the situations that can create these problems and steps you can help these clients take that could even help them improve the situation. Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So I'm not a doctor and I'm not giving you advice to use with your clients, but I want to go over some insights that I came across when I was digging up this situation. And I'll put some links in the description below this video to some of the studies and some of the papers that I'm talking about as we dig into this a little bit. So if we want to talk about bile acid malabsorption or bile acid diarrhea, we really need to go over the function of bile and what's going on when things get a little bit complicated in this scenario. So bile is this soapy substance that's made by the liver, and then it comes down here and it's stored in the gallbladder so that it can be saved and concentrated until it's called upon to help us digest our food correctly. So bile comes down here and helps neutralize the acids that are leaving the stomach. Bile also helps us emulsify our dietary fats or break them down so the body can use them. We also need bile so that we can access our fat-soluble vitamins like A, E, D, and K. So those are pretty big deals. Bile is also used as a detox pathway. Most people know that the liver filters toxins out of the body, but a lot of people don't know that the liver puts a lot of those toxins into the bile so that when the bile comes down here to help us digest our food and it's moving through the intestinal tract, it can carry those toxins through the intestinal tract so they go out the back door when we poop like a champion. So the problem is that bile doesn't just consist of bile acids. It has bile acids, but it also has water and cholesterol and bilirubin. So it's like this substance. And as the bile moves through, in the small intestine, these bile acids get reabsorbed so that they can be recycled. Most of those bile acids get recycled. But that doesn't mean that all of the bile gets recycled. The bile is green, and that's what helps turn that stool brown. So if all of the bile was getting recycled, like a lot of people talk about, then the stool wouldn't be brown because it all would have gone back to where it came from. But the bile substance itself continues to move through and carry some of those toxins out the back door, and it's just these bile acids that are getting reabsorbed and then recycled. So a lot of people feel like when you're digging into this malabsorption situation and you're looking at this reabsorption that seems to be important, a lot of people will say, well, for some reason these bile acids are not getting reabsorbed, so too much bile is accumulating, and then that's creating this diarrhea response. And some people will say, well, it's not getting reabsorbed, and so now you don't have enough bile acids, so you're not making enough bile, and that's creating all this diarrhea issue. So there seems to be different sides of this scenario that can create trouble. But a lot of people will say, well, you have too much bile. But we need to understand that we might need to look at this a little bit differently to really see what's going on with our clients. So the first thing we need to understand is that location matters. This stomach acid that's made here in the stomach, we all know that the stomach makes hydrochloric acid, and that's there to help us acidify the food so that we can break that food down and get all the nutrients out of that food. We also know that the stomach lining is made to hold those acids, that mucus layer protects the stomach lining. But that acid is not meant to be in the other parts of the digestive tract. We know if that acid goes back up the esophagus, it's going to irritate that lining and damage that esophageal lining. We know if the acid comes down here, it can irritate this digestive tract and get rushed out the door. The body can pull all the water that it can to that digestive tract to cool off those acids and then rush it out the back door and create some diarrhea issues. So we know that that stomach acid is meant to be in the stomach like that. What we also need to understand is that bile is this alkaline substance that helps us neutralize the acids coming from the stomach, and it's meant to be held there in the gallbladder where it can be concentrated so a small amount can be more effective. And it shouldn't exist anywhere down here in the state that it is in the gallbladder. This stomach acid, this HCl, should not exist anywhere down here in the same state that it is in the stomach. What happens is when this acid leaves the stomach and comes into the duodenum, that acidity into the duodenum is what triggers the gallbladder to squirt that alkaline bile down to help neutralize those acids. And then all these other things from the pancreas, the bicarb helps neutralize some things too. But it's this acidity here in the duodenum that's triggering those actions to happen. So it's not just the locations that matter, it's the structures of these substances that matter while they're in those locations. So when this acidity leaves and gets neutralized by this bile meeting it, when those two things collide, you get this acidity from the stomach and the alkalinity from the bile. When they collide, we get this sizzle that really helps us bust the food apart and get all the nutrients out of that food. It's those opposite pHs colliding that creates that chemical type reaction. But when they collide, all of a sudden now those substances are different. If you mix red wine and water, well, now you have something that's very different. You don't have red wine anymore, you don't have water anymore, you have what has become from the two mixing together. So just like that, these substances change when they mix together. It's no longer stomach acid and bile, it's the combination of the two together. So now those pHs change as they move through the intestinal tract. So when acids don't get neutralized, they can be too acidic and they'll irritate the intestinal tract, and the body can bring all this water there to rush it out. But alkalinity has the ability to irritate intestinal lining just like something that's overly acidic. When we look at science, a lot of times chemistry, we see that very alkaline things can be just as damaging as acidic things. And bile is not that alkaline, but it gives us an idea of understanding how something can irritate a sensitive lining if it's leaning too far in one direction on that pH scale. So when alkaline bile comes down here, but it wasn't mixed with stomach acid, it has the ability to irritate this intestinal lining in the same way that the acidic product can. So I'll put a link to a study below that can confirm this about a PPI-induced BAM. And they're basically saying that when somebody's using a PPI, which is a proton pump inhibitor like acid reflux medication that turns off the ability for the body to make that stomach acid, when people use those, they're more likely to experience this bile acid malabsorption and bile acid diarrhea issues. And they kind of felt like, well, when you're turning off this stomach acid, now you're going to have these bacterial overgrowth issues. Because this stomach acid is not just there to help us acidify the food so we can break it down. It's the barrier to the whole digestive tract. When bad guys come in on the food that we're eating, they should die in an acid bath with that stomach acid. But if someone's using a PPI that's turning off, now the bacteria can come in. They're like, oh, this is nice. Let's set up camp and have a keg party here. And then they migrate down here, and we end up with these small intestinal bacterial overgrowth issues, or SIBO, like all the cool kids have these days. And then we get that overgrowth, and that creates trouble. And in this paper that I linked below, they kind of felt like, well, all this bacterial overgrowth here is changing the structure of that bile that comes down. And it's changing those bile acids and making them something that creates this diarrhea response. So a lot of people feel like, well, that for some reason with all this bile here, it restricts water from being reabsorbed. So now there's too much water in this intestinal tract, so of course it's going to come out in this diarrhea situation. But what if that's not the case? What if the body is bringing the water there on purpose? The body is usually smarter than we are. I know that we think that we're very fancy, but the body usually knows what it's doing. So what if this alkaline bile that never met the stomach acid like it's supposed to, because there wasn't much stomach acid there, now it's still in this alkaline state moving through here, and that over-alkalinity irritating the intestinal tract could cause the body to bring water there to flush it out, to remove that irritation. So we see that there's an increase with this PPI-induced BAM, but for a lot of reasons, a lot of your clients are not making enough stomach acid, and they're not even taking a PPI. There's a lot of things that can interrupt the process of the body having the ability to produce that HCl in the stomach. And if they're not producing enough, well, there's not that acidity coming down, and now we have this bile coming down. So we also see this with gallstones or cholestasis, and cholestasis is just a situation where this bile is really not flowing the way that it's supposed to. We see that there's a lot of things in our life that have the ability to thicken up that bile so it doesn't flow correctly. And then when the gallbladder gets called on and it sends this bile down, if it's way too thick and sticky to really flow right, maybe all of it doesn't leave. And then what does it do in the gallbladder if it stays there? It continues to concentrate until it concentrates into sludge or into stones. So if we have that situation where this bile is not moving, now we have acidity leaving the stomach, but there's no bile to neutralize that acidity. So now the acidity is coming down here and irritating the intestinal lining and creating this response of bringing all the water here to the intestinal tract to wash all this junk out. But you can see that was two different diarrhea responses for totally different reasons, but they could still be viewed as, oh, well, that's bile acid malabsorption. Either you don't have enough bile because it's not getting reabsorbed and sent back and recycled, so you're not making enough bile, or it could be caused by, oh, it's malabsorption because you have too much bile down there. It's not being reabsorbed, so too much is accumulating, and that's causing the diarrhea. But you can see one diarrhea was because of an overly acidic response, and one diarrhea was from an overly alkaline response. And if the body's bringing all this water to rush out this irritant, how would it ever get reabsorbed? If it's running out of the door 300 miles an hour, how is it really going to have time to get reabsorbed so that it can be recycled? Maybe that's why it's not coming back to the body like it should be. We also see that when this gallbladder is removed, now there's no place to store that bile. So there's no bolus of bile to come down and help neutralize the acids leaving the stomach. But the liver would still make bile, and it still sent down this biliary pathway into the small intestine, right in there in the duodenum. But it's kind of trickling down there all the time, all day long. And if that bile is coming down here, not meeting with stomach acid leaving the stomach, because maybe they haven't had a meal or something, it's just coming down all the time. Well, then it's coming down here in that state where it should only exist in the gallbladder, in that bile state. And if that's coming down here all the time, if the body is making enough of it, it could really irritate that intestinal lining and create a diarrhea response that way. But also, we find that a lot of clients without their gallbladder are really getting diarrhea because there's just not enough bolus there to neutralize the acids that are leaving the stomach, and then those acids continue to move through there and create that diarrhea response. So we see that a lot with gallbladder removal, but it's important to understand that the diarrhea can be coming from either side of that pH scale, overly acidic or overly alkaline. And the color of the stool can give us some insights. We hear a lot with this BAM stuff where people were saying, oh, I have green diarrhea. Well, green is the color of that bile. So if the bile is coming down there, not meeting with stomach acid, so it's not changing the color or the structure of that bile substance, it's still in its green bile state, and it's irritating this intestinal tract and being rushed out the door, that makes sense that it would be green like that. And we talked about this water reabsorption, how it could just be a situation where the body is doing that on purpose, trying to cool things off. So what we see clients do is we see them supplement with either ox bile or steps to acidify the stomach. And ox bile is just a supplemental form of bile, and it's going to be alkaline like bile. And we like to see clients take that away from their food. Not like it might say on the bottle label, take with your food. If you're taking ox bile with your food, you're turning off the body's ability to acidify that food. You're neutralizing those acids before they have a chance to acidify that food. So we like to see clients take ox bile away from the food. But if a client's diarrhea response was being caused by too much acid that was not getting neutralized, they could take that ox bile away from food and it would help neutralize these acids that are going through the intestinal tract and cool them down and slow them down and improve that diarrhea issue. Now, if somebody had green diarrhea, it's giving some signs that maybe that's caused by too much bile that's not meeting with acids, and they took ox bile, well, their diarrhea could get a whole lot worse. And same with the opposite situations. A lot of people will take either apple cider vinegar, which can acidify the stomach a little bit. It's not going to be enough to help most clients that really need help acidifying their food, but it can be a small boost and help some people. But most clients are going to need to supplement with betaine HCl capsules to really acidify that stomach correctly. So if a client's diarrhea response was being caused because these acids were not getting neutralized and they supplemented with betaine HCl, well, their diarrhea can get a whole lot worse. And that would tell them, well, you don't want to do that. That's making things worse. So we might need to take steps to try this other side to cool things down and maybe supplement with some ox bile to see if we can slow things down and correct that side. Because the most common step that you're going to see people taking is they're going to take these bile salt binders or these sequesters that stop this bile production, and they're basically just kind of turning off the other side of digestion. Well, if this side's not working, and we'll just turn off the other side. But wouldn't it make more sense to fix whichever side was broken so that both sides could work and the client could actually break their food down and get the nutrients out of that food? That just makes more sense in my head. But you can see that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach with your clients that you can take with this. You're really going to have to help them test things out and see which things are going on. And you can get insights and get clues as to which side is more likely really needing help. In my book, Health Pro Results, chapters 3 and 4 kind of walk you through understanding which sides of digestion may or may not be working for your clients and steps that could help improve those. And the book is available on Amazon, but I'll put a link in the description below so you can get that whole thing totally for free, and that'll walk you through that process. And if you're a consumer that just happened upon this video, then I'll also put a link for my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, and chapters 3 and 4 of that book will walk you through that same process. So I'll put a link of that one so you can get that one for free as well. They both cover the same thing in those chapters, but the Health Pro Results book is really just written for health professionals, or if you're a consumer, the Kick Your Fat in the Nuts one is more appropriate for you. But what we see a lot is if someone's lost their gallbladder, the most common thing we're going to see is that the diarrhea situation is being caused by acids that are not being neutralized. And taking ox bile will help cool that down. And if a client does still have their gallbladder, then we like to see them take steps to thin that bile out so that we can help that bile flow the way that it's supposed to and come down and help neutralize those acids. So we'll put a link in the description below for our video on 5 steps to help clients improve bile flow so you understand the steps that can help there. But it's really about helping clients understand what both sides of digestion are doing, what type of supplements are going to help improve either side, and then really paying attention to what happens if you test things out, understanding which way to adjust, and that's the way that clients really have the ability to correct these situations. And since a lot of these situations are going to be clients that have removed their gallbladder, then you can jump over right now and check out our video on 6 steps after gallbladder removal to understand insights that can help those clients. I can't wait to hear about your results.